And we're back for the junior year. My junior year was not any less chaotic than the previous years. This time I was studying abroad in Berlin, and we were living in a tiny hostel room with a small fish tank. This hostel was a last-minute change from our usual housing due to continued Wi-Fi problems and the fact that they weren't able to renew the lease. So it was an experience, to say the least, and I don't get the impression that the hostel enjoyed having us there. They made it clear that they didn't want any of our mail or our packages, but we didn't have anywhere else that we could receive, like medical bills or like important communication. And, they also made up rules about bike parking and generally tried to avoid helping us. And I don't know what caused the animosity, to be honest. It didn't seem like we were that bad to me. But it was in Berlin that I met Julia and Florian, and they're two specialists who introduced me to the world of high-quality fish care. They knew all the scientific names of their species, their localities, and each tank was beautifully natural, filled with the plants, natural substrate, hardscape. They knew everything about their fish's balanced diet, and they provided really high-quality foods, including live food, for the fish in their care. Julia especially specialized in gobies, and you've probably seen some of her pictures either on the database or online. And I realized that the standard for care for fish and animals in general in Berlin was so much better than the US and most of the other countries, if not all of the other countries I've ever been to. All the fish were in natural tanks, and the stores had extremely good quality fish and care. There were no dead fish floating in the water, and the shopkeepers asked to make sure I knew what requirements the fish needed before even allowing me to buy them. And I think this set the stage for what fish keeping should be like. If the rest of the world followed these standards, we would have far fewer invasive species and stories of pet goldfish dying after a few days. Julia and Florian were also really generous. They lent me a small tank for the semester, along with a lot of plants and some dwarf crayfish. And it was the first time that I learned that you should trim the roots of an aquatic plant before replanting them, and that'll help them get reestablished more quickly in the new location. To me, I always tried to avoid damaging the roots, but apparently if you clip them, they grow faster, which was, kind of a fun fact to learn. Around this time, I was also introduced to my capstone project. So for those of you who don't know, a capstone is a sort of final project for undergraduates that they do in their last year of college. It's a research-based project that allows students to apply what they've learned throughout their college career to a real-world problem. It's essentially like a thesis, but for undergraduate students. And for me, that problem was the conservation of freshwater species. I'm sure you all guessed it. For the capstone in our junior year, we actually had to do several different topics to try and see what clicked the most. So we tried a creative outlet, a research-based project, and a product-based project. And the one that clicked with me the most was the research-based project, even though I wrote all three about my fish. And honestly, that took up most of my Berlin semester. The second semester, we moved to London. And we spent a lot of time at the airport because we had to check out from Berlin at 10 a.m., but we couldn't check into London until 8 p.m. Geographically, they're very close together and the flight was pretty short, so we just sat and waited. But our flat in London was incredible. We lived in 4 to 7 person flats with a kitchen and a bathroom, and I had the best roommates. I actually set up a worm bin for vermiculture in the kitchen and a fish tank on the windowsill with guppies and Daisy's rice fish. Thankfully, I had very, very patient and committed roommates. But over the semester, I raised over 50 little fry from that tank, and I started to focus more on my project. So this first ideation phase, I had a huge sheet of poster paper, which I was using to plan my project and all of its parts. So in London, the fish stores were not as good as the ones in Berlin, and there were no clubs or other hobbyists for me to talk to. But I realized how much I enjoyed fish keeping and how few new hobbyists there were. I talked to this guy at the fish store that I found, and he said that the old ones were literally dying out. And I really want to preserve this hobby because I think that the aquarium hobby is actually one of the key components of freshwater conservation. And over the summer, I knew what I needed to do. So I continued to work on my capstone project, and while talking to my professor, realized that it was too broad. So instead of doing the whole project that I had been working on as a capstone, I decided to instead just do a literature review on current literature around conservation aquaculture, which is what I proposed. It's not a completely new topic, but a wide-scale implementation definitely is. And the idea of using endangered species as a food source and, pairing it with plant growth definitely ties nicely with my desire to do conservation work once I graduate. And it really allowed me to keep working on the other parts of my project without the same expectation of depth. While I was doing this, I had also hired a group of freelancers to code the first version of the database, and after a while it was clear they bit off more than they could chew. They ended up working way out of budget and out of the desired time frame, but the database looked amazing. The more you played with it though, the more bugs it had, and this will be important later. But there was something else important happening in the summer of 2022, and that is that I got my own dog. Her name is Inoki. I got her for my 21st birthday, and it was the results of basically 2 decades of research. Since, as I mentioned before, I had wanted a dog since before I could write. And while I won't go into too much detail, we were working with a family to see if Inoki had the potential to be a service dog when she was growing. And this really allowed me to test my dog training abilities. I've worked as a dog trainer for the previous 2 summers and worked with dogs on basic manners and even, mild reactivity. And this was the next challenge. But anyways, back to the fish. The big event that happened over the summer was the Triple Crown Convention in Kentucky, which was a meetup between the American Cichlid Association, American Killifish Association, American Live Bears Association, and at the last minute, the American Rainbow Fish Association. And this was the first big convention to happen post-COVID that I was able to attend, since normally during the year and even during the summer, I'm out of the country when these events happen. The coordinators were super enthusiastic about my project and allowed me to have a vendor's table and even to attend as a backup speaker, which was really cool. I didn't get the opportunity to speak, but I did create the presentation and I was ready, so there was definitely something there. And the convention was amazing. I managed to talk with so many people about my project, and I shared about the goals, and I even had people experiment with the database. And it was during this time that I realized that the database was currently unusable and that I needed to look at other options. But at that convention, I was also selling pins. So those of you who have been following me for a while know that I've picked endangered species and worked with artists to create enamel pins. And all of the proceeds from that go towards the conservation of these species. So they've been available on the website, but I also created 3 new designs specifically for the convention and made it a contest to see which of the 3 groups could raise the most money. At the convention, I had raised enough money to have another go at creating the database, and I started to ask around to see if any of my classmates would be interested. That part of the story doesn't continue until later. The rest of my summer wasn't much different than it would normally be, and it was just puppy training, fish project, and some work that actually earned money on the side, and I was preparing for my last year. And I knew it was going to be the true test of everything that I had learned, both in and out of university.